Welcome to Chapter 4, Irregular Expenses. Now, what are irregular expenses? If you'll remember back in Chapter 3, we talked about expenses that they're pretty much the same every single month. Things like house payment, car payment. We know they're coming. We know how much they are. We know when they are. We know everything about those expenses. But what about these irregular expenses? Well, irregular expenses are expenses that will occur. We know they're coming. We don't necessarily know when, and we don't necessarily know how much they will be. So how does the program handle expenses like that? I mean, aren't those emergencies if we don't know when and we don't know how much? No, they're not emergencies because we know these expenses are coming. We know Christmas is coming, and we can budget and we can plan for that. We know that our car is eventually going to break down. We know that we're going to have some home repair. We know that our kids or our people close to us are going to have birthdays. So those expenses all occur. We know we're going to go to the doctor, right? We're going to have physician's bills and physician's visits. So those things all are going to occur. We just don't know when, we don't know where, and we don't know how much. But we do have to have a plan for those. The irregular expenses account covers those expenses. Now, debit card access to this account, I say maybe, but for me, it's a yes. I definitely want debit card access to this account. And on the back of the card, so when you set up this account and you get a debit card, this will be a checking account, obviously, you will write irregular expenses, or whatever you call these kinds of expenses in your house. Vacation would be an irregular expense. We might know we're going this year, but we don't know exactly when, we don't know exactly where or how much. So how in the world do we plan for this when there are so many unknowns? Well, there's a very easy way to do that. This is probably the toughest thing I'm going to ask you to do in this entire program as it relates to finances, but it's really very, very simple. You can go to your bank or go to your bank software, which is what I like to do, and you can download your transactions or you can print out your transactions. And I don't care if you do it for last year, calendar year. As of this video, 2016 was last calendar year, January to December, that's fine. Or I don't care if you're watching this video July 1st and you look from June 30th back to July 1st of the previous year, the last 12 months. Either way works. And what you're going to do is make a list of irregular expenses in your life. Now, in the book, I've included a pretty decent list, but it's probably not a comprehensive list for your life. Create a list of what those irregular expenses are. Now, on your printout, all I want you to do is take a highlighter or a pen and underline expenses that fall under those categories. So where you had expenses on for vacation or where you had physician's visit, highlight those expenses and go all the way through the list, capturing all of those expenses that you had over the last 12 months and that fall under those categories. Now what are we going to do? We're simply going to add all of those up. We're just going to add them up. And let's say that all of those irregular expenses come to the number of $3,600. For some, it's going to be, way more than that. For others, it may even be less. Then we're going to divide that big $3,600 number by 12 or by 12 months. And that equals $300. So of all the irregular expenses that we had over the last 12 months, the average per month was $300. So we're going to tell our holding account to transfer out of our salary $300 automatically on the first of the month, ideal, or as your account can stand it. But $300 is the number if $3,600 was the total of your expenses into the irregular expenses account, and it's going to happen every single month. Now this account, unlike the others, is going to be imperfect because Murphy's Law happens. So you may be watching this in July and you're going to start the program in August, and maybe that number for you is $300. You transfer that in there, and then you have a $500 automobile expense. Hey, that's life, guys. That's going to happen. So when you first start this program, the first few months, you could have an expense that exceeded what you had in there. But that's okay. Over the course of 12 months, we're looking at the average. So over the course of 12 months, we believe that in most cases, we're going to be able to capture all of those expenses by the revenue we feed this account. Now, there will be some years that at the end of the year, you are going to have more in this account than you needed. And there will be some years that it's going to be a little less. But the important point is that we are planning and saving for those. So right now, if you had a medical expense or your car broke down, what are you doing? Are you putting that on a credit card? Are you borrowing money from your parents? How are you paying for those things? Are you're trying to work a bunch of overtime? Well, what if you had planned for those and you do have that $500 car payment, car expense, repair expense, but you had $300 in there. So now, instead of being maybe devastated with the $500, now you've only got to find $200. And that's the way it'll be for some of you in this account. Sometimes you won't have hardly enough, but at least you do have something. But many times, especially as the months progress and that account builds up, you're going to find that you have more. I pay my insurance every 6 months, my car insurance. And so I put, I think my number right now is $200 a month. I put into that account. So every 6 months, and I know for some of you, when car insurance day comes, if you pay it, twice a year like I do, you go, oh my gosh, there's $700, $800 got to come out of the account. What are we going to do? Well, for me, it never crosses my mind, because just like in the monthly fixed account, my insurance comes out of that account, don't panic, automatically at 6 months. Why and how? Because I've planned for those expenses and I know the dollars are going to be in there every single time to cover those expenses. And I have mine, over the years and years of doing this. Now, mine is built up to such a point that it's almost like a savings account, in that unless I have some catastrophic expense, which we'll talk about an account for that later, then I don't worry at all about the little irregular, expected but unexpected, if you know what I'm talking about, expenses that come about. But make sure if you use a debit card for this account, remember, write the name of the account, whatever you're going to call this account. If it's irregular expenses, I know this is bizarre, but I call mine vehicle. Even though I may have vacation and birthdays and other things in there, for some reason when I first wrote it down, I wrote vehicle. And I literally took a Sharpie, wrote vehicle, and then put a piece of Scotch tape over it so it wouldn't smudge. And so anytime I have an expense, and to this day, I mentioned it in the book, if something goes wrong with a car, I don't know what it is. It's just that old life or whatever coming up back in me. I go, oh gosh, and then it's like that second of panic, and I go, wait, never mind. Pay for the car, pay for the expense, whatever it is. And so this account, it will give you so much peace. It'll never be perfect. Don't you worry about being perfect. Don't you sit there and think I've got to have the exact right amount in this account all the time, because it's not going to happen. It's not like the monthly fixed account, but it will create an enormous amount of peace in your life, because it's going to handle those unexpected events, which quite honestly today, for many of you, when these things arrive, when braces or let's say a cavity has to be filled, those are emergencies for you today, and those do not need to be emergencies. Why? Because we know they're coming, and we know we can plan for them. So think about how good you've been already. You've handled your monthly fixed expenses. Now you have a plan for these things that are going to occur, and they occur in your life all the time, that you've never planned for in the past. And how is it happening? Remember, it's all happening automatically. The holding account is transferring that dollar amount that you've determined was the right amount into the irregular expenses account automatically. You've got your debit card for that, and you're promising, and you're looking each other in the eye if you're married and saying, hey, we're not going to use this debit card for anything other than what falls under the category of irregular expenses. What would be another way to do that if you feel like you can't trust yourself? There's another account we'll talk about next called Everyday Expenses that definitely has a debit card. You could make this a savings account as well, this irregular expenses account, with no debit card access, so that you would have no chance of making a mistake or an impulse buy and spending out of that account. Listen, it's okay if you struggle in that area. It is 100% fine if you know that you can't trust yourself with that debit card and that account that's building up cash. That's okay. If you need to put a layer of protection between yourself and spending that money, then don't have debit card access. Make it where you have to actually sign into your bank account and transfer that money to spend it. That's just a tip on that. Do whatever you think you need to do in that area. I can't wait to see you in the next chapter. Thanks for joining us.